Hey, my name is Kendall Hewitt, and I wanted to share a story with you that I hope will help you and bless you in your journey. Back in the 1970s, I was a young teenager, and I was attending a school where there was a lot of violence, a lot of fighting. It was about 12 years after the Civil Rights Act, so there was a lot of racial tension. And I had my home room in the gym. And in the gymnasium, I would sit against the back wall at the top of the bleachers. And there were these guys that would come in and work their way through the crowd and collect money. And basically what they were doing was telling everyone that they had to pay a certain amount of money every day for protection, or there would be consequences. And I hadn't really paid attention on days prior to this, but this day they came to me, and there were 3 of them, and they said, you need to pay up. And I told them I wasn't going to give them a dime, and one of them punched me in the head, and I kind of forgot about it. Probably, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks later, I was changing clothes after gym class, and I was in the locker room, and I was in the shower area, and there was no one left. I was the last one in there, and I looked up, and there the 3 of them were, and they kind of laughed, and because they had found me, they said, "There he is," and I didn't have any clothes on, so it was a very vulnerable moment. And these 3 guys rushed in and they began to circle me, just walking around me. One of these guys was the largest one in the group because he had been put back in school for a few years, so he was bigger than most of us. And he rushed up behind me and he put me in what's called wrestlers would call a full Nelson. So he picked me up off the ground and he thrust my head down. And remember, I'm naked. The other 2 were punching me and threatening basically to rape me. And one of them grabbed my genitals. I won't share any more, but it was vicious. Well, when it was all over, they just kind of left me on the floor. And if I didn't mention, this school was in Arkansas. Now, there was a lot of racial tension, and the 3 of them were black. I'm obviously white. And as I walked away, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my parents. Most people didn't see this. It's what was going on in my heart. Because in that moment, not only did I deal with fear, and I didn't recognize it at the time, but there was a vengeance and just a rage. I used to lay awake thinking about what I would do to retaliate, to get back at what had happened to me. And what I learned over time was that you can be screaming for justice and hide murder in your heart. And man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. But at the time, I just couldn't deal with it. And so I kind of buried it. I went on and played football and let out most of my rage on the football field. And then fast forward, years later, I came to Nashville and I met the woman who I'm now married to, and she wanted to be involved in this inner city ministry to kids and families in the inner city. And I had such a visceral response to that I literally used the F word in response to it and said, "I'm not going down there, and you're sure not going down there." And she said, "Well, that's where I feel led to be." And so I ended up going with her. And God began to do a deep work in my heart. And it began with me beginning to understand the love and the kindness of God. And in that process, really coming to understand that we forgive because we've been forgiven. I used to forgive people in kind of a high-minded way, thinking somehow I'm better than them, and therefore I'm going to do them a favor and forgive them. And then when I realized that if we don't forgive, we can't be forgiven. And so forgiveness began in my head, knowing that I needed to deal with something. But I came to a place where I was actually able to forgive from my heart. And I asked the pastor, I said, how do you know when you've forgiven? And he said, when you can find compassion for the people who've harmed you, you'll know that God is in it. And, does it mean that justice doesn't need to be served or that people need to be held accountable? Of course they do. I found a place because of him and because of his mercy that allowed me to forgive from my heart. And I realized that, if you don't forgive, you're already dead. I just want to say this to anyone who is still struggling to find that place of forgiveness. It's impossible without God. It's impossible without coming in into a space of understanding the love of the Father. And Martin Luther King Jr. found a place to forgive. A friend of mine who was killed, her sister was killed at Columbine, and two of his best friends, he found a place to forgive. If I had the opportunity to speak into all that's going on in the nation right now, and even in the world, all the tensions that we're feeling, all of the conflict that we feel happening now and emerging and even in some ways gaining strength, I would say that there's a natural desire for justice. In my case, I had to let go of vengeance. I wanted vengeance, believed I deserved it, and believed that I had the right to act on it. And I was simply waiting and looking for a righteous moment to let it out. When I watch different things that are happening now in the culture, that's what I see. And so that's the reason that I'm sharing this story, is hoping that it can encourage someone to deal with God, to deal with the vengeance in their own heart, to find the love of God, find the kindness of God, and be led to repentance, and then be led to a place of forgiveness and entrust the justice to God. You know, what's ironic in this whole story is the fact that my wife led me into working in the inner city. I actually even ended up asking my wife to marry me in the middle of the inner city. And I remember serving families, children, and one of my favorite things to do in the world is to snow ski. And I remember standing on a hot August day in the middle of the inner city serving hot dogs and watching my wife, face paint the children, and thinking, I have no idea why I would rather be here right now than snow skiing, because it makes no sense. But I knew that God was doing a work that was beyond anything I could have imagined.